Yeah, so we did 88, which was about we had this met I think we ended with this metaphor about how the soul touches intelligibles with its surface,
Hmm.
right? And so that's why I think that we're at 89 now. And so yeah, today I hope to probably finish this section and then we'll do the section on the forms. And who knows, maybe then we'll start the new section on the reflections of the true philosophers. So 89 starts talking about the deceit. The deceit is the way that perception deceives us.
Hmm. So 89, okay. 89. The deceit is caused partly by the objects of perception, which contain a strong admixture of unreality. Okay. Um, Partly by the senses, whose reproductive power does not function faultlessly. Um, right? Um, Again, so the senses, I don't know what the form of the senses, partly by the organs of sense, which add passive elements to the activities of the senses.
Right. So there are problems at every moment, right? So unreality here translates not being, right? So uh, in general, this the Platonic notion that the things that come to be and pass away, they in some sense are not, right? So for instance, their past and future parts are not, right? They're not present, not fully present. And they don't instant they're never fully what they are, so there's going to be something that's not really beautiful and something that looks beautiful. There's going to be something that's not really human and something that looks human. So that's the sense in which they deceive us because we say, oh, it X is Y, X is A, B, or C, but it's never really A, B, or C.
Mhm.
Um, and then he says that there's problems with both with the um, the senses and the sense organs. So the senses is the capacity, right, or the perception, and or the activity of perception. And so there's a failure to reproduce exactly the form in the body, right? So what we know, um not only is there never a are there no perfect circles in the world, we never see circles perfectly. I guess part of this is, for instance, that you only see a circle as a circle if you're looking at it like right in front of you. If you look at it from the side, it's going to actually look like an ellipse, and because of perspective. And this is also an argument used in the philosophy of mathematics by Syrianus and Proclus. And the idea is that an effect is always weaker than its cause, to the degree that the objects of sense are the causes of our perceptions, then the perception is going to be weaker, right? It's not going to have all the perfection of the object. And so it's going to be necessarily weaker. And that's why math can't be the result of abstraction, right? It has to depend on our our innate concepts. And then finally, the organs of sense. So that's the passive elements that we were talking about last time about how knowledge, qua an identity with the object is an activity, or whereas the in perception there's always this passive element that our organ is somehow changed, undergoes a process, right? And to that degree, it's not knowledge; it's an experience, we can say. That's a good way of thinking about it. That in some sense that when they say that knowledge is an activity and not a passion, is to say that what makes knowledge has like nothing to do with the lived experience of knowing that thing, right? to the degree that the lived experience is essential to the thing, it's not knowledge. Um, so okay, so that was all because he uses this term deceit in the text. So um now he goes on to returns to the question about the thought being separate from the body.
Okay. Um, Now, 80, wait.
90.
But what's the act organs of sense acting as? Like, what's the difference between the organs adding it and the sense adding it?
Well, the sense is an activity. So whereas the organs of sense are the actual parts of our body. Or what is
It's because of them that it becomes that there's some passivity in sensing. What's
yeah, it's
the
because the sensing involves our body that there's some passivity in it. Right? The
okay?
other bodies act on our organs.
Okay. Um, 90. Thought is free from the body, which by its very nature, which is by its very nature ignorant of everything, while sense perception is mixed up with it. Right? Thought achieves knowledge of the cause. Sense perception is naturally incapable of inquiring into causes. Thought grabs the essence. Sense perception reports effects. Thought belongs to soul in relation to itself only, since sense perception to soul in relation to other things, so that its knowledge is severed from its object by otherness and separateness. That's the object of.
Of perception.
For this reason, intellection is the truest perception because it is indivisible from the intelligibles.
Right. That I don't know why I included perception there because that just makes things confusing. Um, it the this is actually like the thought of intelligence would be the best translation of that. Um, but let's go to the start. So the idea that bodies are ignorant of everything is because they are by nature divisible and separate, whereas knowledge is some kind of communion with the object. And and so sense perception is mixed up with the body because, it depends on the organs of perception being affected. Um, right, thought achieves knowledge of the cause, whereas the sense perception is actually incapable of inquiring into causes. Right, and thought in this paragraph translate logismos, as he's also translated it in other passages. Right, so what in 87 defined as discursive intelligence. Okay. So like knowledge through reasoning. And so right, so the sense perception just informs that such and such is the case, does not tell you why. Um, then and also it only tells you, that your organs are affected in this and that way. It does not tell you it does not give you the substance, the ousia, right? That is the agent and that causes those perceptions. Just tells you about the perceptions that you receive. Um, thought belongs to the soul in relation to itself only, sense perception to soul in relation to other things. So that its knowledge is severed from its object by otherness and separateness. So that is interesting. So the soul is both separated from its objects, because it's in a body and they are other bodies. And I guess also by separateness because it's knowing things that aren't soul, right? So that's both the otherness and separateness. And this word for separateness here is to diaspasmos. That's like the rending. So this is it's a reference to Dionysus being ripped apart. And so that's interesting that the he's bringing back the idea that connection to the body is titanic. There we go. Right. Okay. And whereas on the other hand, intellection is the truest knowledge, um, you, because it's indivisible from the intelligible, right? It's actually just produced immediately by the intelligible. And even when when we have an intellection, it's it's not that Nous is shining a light out on us from outside, but it's stimulating the concept in us to produce its light. Okay, so here he's just gone through the many different ways that thought is separate from the body, and superior to perception. And this is uh, right. He's commenting on this passage in the Phaedo where Socrates says, "And the soul reasons, here would be thinks, best when none of these sensible senses troubles it," right, and so on. So that's what he's commenting on. Um, okay. Let's go on with 91.
Okay. Where am I?
The beauty of the soul.
Okay, the beauty of the soul is knowledge because of its brilliance and its loveliness. A soul that is free from the ugliness of matter and ignorance is even more beautiful. But most beautiful of all is the soul that has blended itself with the light of intelligence. Here, however, he uses the superlative in the comparison with the knowledge that depends on sense perception.
Right. Um, so here, let me just right here. It's curious that he doesn't really use the he doesn't use the superlative of beautiful here. Oh no, he does, right at 65C5. So, what the Cooper translates as the soul reasons best. That best is actually Kalista, most beautiful. And it would be the in a most beautiful manner. And yeah, in Greek that can be just the in the best manner. Because you can say that, someone does something kalos to mean that someone does something well. But he naturally connects it to beauty, to being beautiful. Um, and so he's interpreting that in light of the Phaedrus, that the idea that it's, brilliant and lovely, that it's brilliant is, that it puts forth knowledge from itself. That would be the beauty of this whole. And that it is lovely would be that it isn't an object of eros, of desire by other things. So by
Mhm.
putting forth knowledge of itself, it is desired by others. What the translator translates here is the soul that is free from the ugliness. Free here is pure, kathara. So the soul that is pure of the ugliness of matter and ignorance is even more beautiful. So that's, the soul that it's thinking and not perceiving because it's not affected by the ugliness of matter and ignorance. So these things are ugly. I mean, they're, opposed to it being something that that knows by itself and has its own form. So that's um, but then most beautiful out of all is the soul that has blended itself with the light of intelligence. So that would be, the soul that's not just uh, discovering things on its own um, through like mathematics, but is having these insights that are stimulated by nous. And so he's moving on. This is already something that connects this topic. I guess he's also explaining like why does this topic then or this phrase, this kalista, move into the consideration of the forms? Because when it says it knows best, then that must mean and is in the most beautiful manner. Well, what's most beautiful is to know through is to be mixed with the forms, right? Um, and and then there's the like this concession, but maybe in this case, in this sentence, he's just doing it's using the superlative not really in the strict sense, but rather in a comparison to perception.
So it's not like what is this beautiful like adding us here? What is it giving us that we didn't have before?
um I mean, I guess what what the beautiful I guess what the beautiful does add here is the idea that this soul that knows well is an object of desire. Um, we that is something that hadn't come in previously, and he hasn't given us an argument exactly for why it becomes an object of desire. I mean, this is something surely that Plato and Platonists believe, and there's the speech of Alcibiades at the end of the symposium about how much he desires Socrates, right? And this is not because Socrates is a beautiful person. Um, so it's not because he has a beautiful body. Um, so it's certainly there is this idea that that the soul that knows is beautiful, but why? Well, it probably has to do with something like since it talks about it being brilliant, it's probably something about how the sun and gold are beautiful, right? Shining. Why are shiny things beautiful? Um, Plotinus asked this question in on beauty, and it's a objection that he raises against I think it's Stoic theories that explain beauty as symmetry, right? Because these things are simple and there's no symmetry here, but we think these are things are beautiful. So to desire something is to be, you want to be united to what you desire, especially if we're thinking about like erotic desire caused by beauty. And if and right, we can think later about like in the symposium, of course, the official diatoma view is that beauty excites desire because we think that in the beautiful thing our children will grow well, we'll have good children in the beautiful thing. And therefore we can become immortal through the beautiful thing. Um, but so the first thing, but so those are two things, the immortality and union. With regard to union, something that shows itself, that makes itself known, it is uniting itself to you, right? You do not have to seek it, but rather it is uniting itself to you. And so maybe um the person who's brilliant, right, who shows forth with like insights and knowledge, that person is attractive because they seem to be like oh, I can enter the mind of this person. This person is sharing their mind, something like that. And and it's not just that they're spouting all their opinions. What they are transmitting is knowledge. So it's something that can go into my mind as well, right? Something I can agree with. Um, Now, with regard to a beautiful person or a beautiful thing being something that can bring our children to term, and therefore guarantee our immortality. Maybe also the brilliant mind is like someone who can, like the is a productive mind, and so it's showing fertility and fecundity of mind. And so perhaps there the idea is that if you talk with this person, then you will, everything you give back to you give to them, they'll give back to you in like a richer way, right? The things that you we can also perhaps think of this like a person who knows and has this active mind, they'll also have the active memory. So like they retain what you say, and so you in and they know you, and so indeed you live on in them in that sense, and you even grow in them because they are this active source, right? So that's what the I guess what the beauty adds to us.
Hmm. Okay. Um, that's okay. Let's continue. Um, the 92, right? 92. Though the soul has a separate existence, it is said to reside in the hand, said like in the Timaeus or things like that, right?
Yeah.
Um, and this is borne out by the fact that diseases of the brain cause insanity. Okay. How then can it still be separate? Because the head has a certain affinity with the soul, so far as it is primarily fit to receive the light of knowledge that the soul irradiates, just as the heart receives its life giving power. In a similar way, one might say that God is in heaven, though he is everywhere or nowhere.
Um, right. So Neoplatonic doctrine, since Plotinus, the soul's in the body as a whole and in every part as a whole, but we say that, for instance, that the reasoning part is in the brain, because that organ is suited to receive the or that power of the soul. So everything else is present there as well, but that organ can only receive that, right? And so he's saying this that so the head has a certain affinity with the soul, and the heart has the life-giving power. So, I mean, this is a question about the head or the heart. That's long-standing debate from Plato and Aristotle. Plato said the head, Aristotle said the heart. Then later there were like that doctors later mostly sided with the Platonic view, especially because they distinct like they mapped out the nervous system, and they there were these facts about brain disease that cause insanity. And again, the point about the brain disease here is that um, brain disease doesn't show that the mind depends on the body, right? It just shows that the reception of the mind depends on the brain, right? That's the point. And also the thing about God, that's curious about like that God here would be nous, right? And and then you can say that nous is more in the heavens because they act rationally, and it is through them that things down here are organized. Um, but in principle, nous is everywhere and nowhere. It's a curious way of speaking of just this singular, the God. Uh, um, yeah, so that's why. And here he has by 65 C7 9. Oh, because he's talking about the way that the soul is in the body and how it can, take leave, since he's mentioned take leave of the body and so on. And uh, therefore, there's a question here about in what sense can it be separate? And that's why this objection is dealt with here. Um,
Mhm.
okay.
The
Now
basic point would
he's,
be something like that we say that things are in a certain place, not because they depend on that place, but because they show something of themselves better there, like
yeah,
because of the receiver being better suited for that.
right. The soul is in the body the way that the we are in a mirror. Right. Um, Now the right, so that wraps up the argument that, well, if you look at perception and it doesn't know real things. If we want to know what things are, we need to think and use our knowledge to separate ourselves from what the senses tell us. Now there's a third point, which is that the forms can be apprehended by pure thought. So let me just share here the text again. So, right. So it starts with what about the following, Simmias? Do we say that there is such a thing as the just itself or not? We do say so by Zeus. And the beautiful and the good, of course. And have you ever seen any things with your eyes? In no way, he said. Or have you ever grasped them with any of your bodily senses? I'm speaking of all things such as bigness, health, strength, and in a word, the reality of all other things, that each of them, that which each of them essentially is, right? In their ousia. Is what is most true in them contemplated through the body, or is this the position whoever else prepares himself best and most accurately to grasp that thing itself, which he is investigating will come closest to the knowledge of it, obviously. Then he will do this most perfectly who approaches the object with thought alone, without associating any sight with his thought or dragging in any sense perception with his reasoning, but who, using pure thought alone, tries to track down each reality pure and by itself, freeing himself as far as possible from eyes and ears and a word from the whole body, because the body confused the soul does not allow it to acquire truth and wisdom whenever it is associated with it. Will not that man reach reality, Simmias, if anyone does? What you say, said Simmias, is indeed true. So there's questions here about so that he immediately presupposes the forms. So we'll get a short argument for why there should be forms. There are questions about why does he mention explicitly these forms: justice, beautiful, good, also bigness, health, and strength. And then there's just this wrap up at the end and the distinction between wisdom, thought and sense perception. So these are the issues that he raises here. Okay.
Hmm.
So um, you can continue at 93.
Okay, 93. Just as the soul, while tied to the senses, seems material and inseparable from the body, seems to be, so, so, interesting. So, when in contact with intelligible and immaterial realities, it can be thought of in no other way than as separable. Hmm.
Right. Um,
That's
so what are you gonna say?
not sure.
Oh, yeah, that it is interesting that he says that soul, while tied to the sense, seems to be material inseparable from the body. And yeah, all the, arguments for that the soul has to be a body or is tied to the body are often through the senses, right? That it is having some kind of interaction with the body, with other bodies, and therefore it has to be bound to it, or also things that he didn't mention here, but that it controls the body and moves it. And so how can it act on the body without being material or inseparable? And then also, but the other, then it has the flip side is that if you say that it's in contact with intelligible and immaterial realities, then how can it be inseparable, right? So if you could, it has to be separate them too. So, for instance, if the soul can somehow think that it can somehow know things that are entirely in the present, that don't have past or future, how then could it be inseparable from the body, which grows and decays? Um,
Mhm.
so that's
Right.
yeah.
Like this whole third argument is like backwards, meaning it would like there's one way where it seems like the forms or separate things existing depends on, or at least us knowing that they exist, depends on there being some kind of separate soul or separate intellect in the human being. Because otherwise, we would say, well, everything is just material and so on. And here it's like going backwards, like assuming that these forms exist and that we know them, then it seems at least reasonable to think that the soul is immaterial or
Right, but like if you think of, for instance, Parmenides. Parmenides seems to have an argument that we know something intelligible, but and he in his poem, at least as far as we got it, he doesn't really give us an argument for the separate existence of the soul, right? And so there's does seem to be that there's it's that arguments about intelligibles and that we know intelligibles are prior to the soul being separate or not. And the Right. And Aristotle is someone who thinks that there are intelligible things, and well, according to some interpretations, the he thinks that the soul is not separate, right? Um, from from the bodies. And furthermore, there's an advantage to knowing the separation and also immortality of the soul in this way, because, and that's why Proclus and the Elements shows it this way, because if you show that the soul is separate because it knows the higher things, it's knowledge, like the way Proclus does it is like soul knows nous, therefore it knows itself, and therefore it is separate because what knows itself is separate. And their self-knowledge comes from nous, so it comes from its own causes. So it's more true self-knowledge because knowledge through the cause. And so there's a way in which knowing, uh, you know, this should be, you should, if you want to have true knowledge of that your soul is separate and of anything about your soul, you should actually start from its causes, which are the intelligibles.
Mhm. like by the standard Platonic thing that knowing is always of causes or some so immediately takes you out of this.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
otherwise you have to have knowledge be something more imminent and then like none of this starts somehow.
None of what starts.
Oh, Platonism. Like like it all seems to start from this like from these like kind of very like basic I don't know intuitions or understandings that knowledge is of something higher than at least like than us simply taken and then we'd like okay so then you are also something that knows and then it must be all of this.
yeah, I mean, this conception of knowledge is indeed very central to Platonism, and in general, and the idea that we can know uh, in this full sense. of, we know what is, and therefore there is some kind of identity between being and thinking. That seems to be, uh, yeah, central and developed then later. I mean, the stuff about the good and desiring that everything desires the good, that's probably independent and prior, right? Because there's our access to the good is independent of, is like prior to our knowledge of being. But yeah, this is certainly one of the most central things.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay, so this is
94?
like an argument like that should just like you assume that if anyone assumes that there is some kind of knowledge of immaterial realities, then it immediately makes it plausible that the soul is somehow immaterial, just like knowledge or contact with material realities makes it at least an argument that soul is material.
Right. So, yeah, and remembering this is the context, these are three different arguments for why the philosopher should detach himself from the body.
Mhm. Right. Okay. Um, okay. If there is knowledge more exact than sense perception, there ought to be also objects of knowledge more real than the objects of sense perception. And if realities must exist prior to their images, the immaterial must exist prior to the material. And if the perfect becomes before the imperfect, the intelligible world is necessarily prior to the sensible world. For material forms are broken up by matter and are mixed with their own privation.
Right. So presumably because the simius just agrees so quickly to the existence of the forms, we get this short argument for why there's forms, why there's an intelligible world here. And so again, the idea that the knowledge has, if there's knowledge more exact, there has to be objects of knowledge that are more. Here he wrote more true. You could also, the Greek literally is translated as more true, and not more real. And right, but again, this depends on that idea that against abstraction, right? Abstraction doesn't work to explain where um, the more exact things come from. There, it has to, so you can't derive mathematics from sensible things. They have to have their own objects, right? Um, and then also, if realities, that's also again, if the things that are true must exist prior to their images, right? If the originals have to exist prior to their images, then the immaterial must exist prior to the material. Again, this is the idea that uh, every material thing, every embodied thing is going to be like and not exactly what we claim them to be, what they claim to, and therefore they're going to be the immaterial has to exist prior. And again, also the perfect from the imperfect. Again, the whole thing seems to turn around this idea that whenever we say that something is, we say that it or is something, we say that with reference to a certain standard. This standard is precise and perfect and is none of the individual material things and is, as it were, the original. And therefore, it has to there is an intelligible world prior to the world known by perception. Um, so this isn't, this is just one way of arguing for the forms. Neoplatonists developed many others, like all the arguments for nous are arguments for the forms as well, and uh, and there are others. But this is just a quick one that he's added for the sake of teaching the Phaedo.
Okay. Just give me 1 second. I'm gonna close the door.
Sure. Huh,
Sorry.
that's fine. That's fine.
Um, so yeah,
It's all
um,
right.
95, right? Okay. The word itself, so beauty itself, whatever you say, justice itself,
Right.
added to the names of kinds, denotes the authentic as against the imitation, the unmixed against as against that which is mixed with matter, the universal and unique as against the qualified and the particular, the primary as against the relative.
Right. So it's just um nothing too new here. So kinds is forms, right? The the authentic is actually the strict, so in the strict sense, right? Um, and I wouldn't translate here what he says what he calls unique. So that's monoeides. So that's mean it has only one form, so it's just what it is, right? And so that's the contrast here. It's the universal and what is just what it is, what just has that form, in contrast to what is in a way that, right, and what is particular. So the qualified is opposed to the monoides, the entirely of one form, and the particular is contrasting the universal. And primary here, the word he uses proturgon, so it's the thing that is primary effective. It's what inaugurates that. So, the beauty itself is the first thing to be beautiful, and then everything else has a derivative beauty. That's the idea. Um, but yeah, again, it's just because he uses itself in this passage, especially the first usage, says as the just itself. And um, what's curious here is that in other situations, uh, Plato uses the formulation itself by itself, right? Autokatot, and but he doesn't use it here. And so in other cases, for instance, Proclus will distinguish itself, which just means that it's the pure quality, with by itself, and then by itself indicates that it exists separately. But he didn't make that distinction here.
Okay. Um,
Um,
let's continue. 96. Justice is the cause of order in forms. So explaining these forms mentioned. To beauty, they owe, and where am I? 96. And the desire to mingle with each other. And goodness causes them to preserve and perfect each other. This triad belongs to soul in the first place. Hmm.
right. So that the sci that the triad belongs to the soul. I mean, couldn't just be is about the soul. Um, and it could be this triad is more about the soul because he's distinguishing it from the other triad, which is that it's what magnitude, health, and strength, or bigness, health, and strength in the Cooper. And which is more has more to do with the body, right? Um, and so that might be that's the point because it would be odd for him to say, for instance, that in Nous there isn't uh, beauty, um, beauty, justice, and good, right? It's just that we see them more in the soul first and in living things.
And that is
Um,
because, um,
that is what is because.
why is it more in the soul? Why do we see it more in the soul?
Well, um, they all are connected with virtue. Um, that would seem to be a reason to see them more in the soul than an object. Also, for instance, being just, you would, I mean, of course, Neoplatonists will say, well, the order of the seasons, that's justice, and that fire goes up and earth goes down, that's justice. But certainly the more immediate meaning of justice is that, is being a just person, like following the laws and things like that. Um, but what's interesting here also is that the or that these three forms are defined, as it were, as metaforms, right? They are defined as not, for instance, justice here is not um, each thing doing your own job, your own activity, but it's the cause of order of the in forms. So it's something that it's a property that affects all of the forms together, right? The fact that for instance, that being is prior to living being. That would be something that justice, right? That justice causes. Um, you know, um, and yeah, and that they mingle with each other. That's key Platonic doctrine. So that there's this the communion of the forms with each other. So, for instance, being and difference together generate not being in the sophist. Um, but in general, so each form is what it is, but then it also mixes with the others, and that would be then um, desire, right? That would be caused by beauty. This is connected probably also with the idea that the living being itself in the Timaeus is the most beautiful of all living beings, and it is, of course, the mixture of all of them together. It's this living being that is all the living beings mixed together. And the good here preserves each of them and perfects them. So here it's interesting that the good and the beautiful are in some kind of tension because the beautiful makes them mixed, whereas the good makes each of them what it is, preserves them in that mixture, right, and makes each of them perfect. And then again, each of them is a norm and perfect in that way, and that's how we see goodness in each of them. Um, so that's an interesting thing. Also, that it is interesting that um, the forms will have this, as it were, meta role. In part, it's to be expected, right? Because we have this theory developed at this time that each of the forms corresponds to a certain nous that knows all things. And therefore and so in the nous of a certain form, then everything is going to be known according to that form. So the forms should have, besides a distinct content, they're going to have some kind of universal content through which you could know everything. So for instance, justice would be a metaphysics that of where everything is known in a fully ordered manner. Beauty would correspond to a knowledge of all things through but where they're all seen as mixtures, and goodness, the form of goodness, distinct from goodness itself, is connected with one where everything is strives to be itself or something like that. Um, and this is something that's not just here. So, for instance, in the Parmenides commentary, right? I mean, in the Parmenides, many individual forms are mentioned in the arguments against forms, right? So, there's one dilemma to do with likeness. There's another to do with being big or small. And when Proclus comments on that, he takes each of these and then he shows how they are also, as it were, meta principles, right? Existing amongst the forms. Specifically, magnitude, which shows up here as well. For instance, he explains that magnitude is actually that which makes one form superior to another, right? That would be what magnitude there means. So that's also like a reason for why to um, speak of them in this meta way, because then you make them more conceptual, right? They're not connected to if since they're connected to these logical properties of like order or a combination. In the case of beauty, then we can understand how they exist without bodies, right? Okay,
Okay.
so in the 97, he'll talk about the triad that he says is connected to the body.
Hmm. Okay. 97. The second triad is more closely connected with the body. Okay, makes sense. Magnitude, health, strength. We have a fortiori argumentation here. If even corporeal forms are grasped by thought, how much more certainly is this true of incorporeal forms?
Right. He doesn't really explain in what sense magnitude, health, and strength are um, forms, right? Um, 98 says that if deals with magnitude a bit. But as I said, so one way, so uh, in Proclus, magnitude in the most of the forms is what organizes, makes some forms superior to others. So magnitude has to do with superior, inferior. Health, of course, can be something close to justice and beauty, right? Maybe even a mixture of justice and beauty because it has to do with, as it were, a good mixture in your body. And so presumably like the idea of order and mixture is health. And strength, it could be, for instance, the very idea of causal power. Right? Strength could be dunamis,
Hmm.
right? They are. So that those would be the ways of explaining how these could be forms. And as he says, there's an implicit a fortiori argument here
But
to
this
show
would be
that.
like a kind of normal argument where people talk about these things, but nobody ever saw them. Like there are abstractions. At least that is true. Like you can't see
Um,
strength, you could see strong things. You get the question is if strength exists, but uh, or maybe even you can't even see strong things because strong it's like requires like a story, like he is able to do that or he did that or something like that.
right. Well, yeah, I'm remembering that there's yeah, so like in your arguments about um, wrestling, you're using these concepts. And so that shows that, these postulating things like magnitude, health, and strength is not some weird thing that philosophers do. You do it too. And so, you can also admit that there is justice, beauty, and you can't object, oh, I don't really believe in this justice, beauty, and the good because they seem very abstract. But no, you use abstractions too. You wrestling critic, you. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Okay. 98. Two corollaries. First, magnitude is meant in the absolute sense here, not as the opposite of smallness. So like the concept of size or things having a certain size.
Yeah.
Um, Secondly, not bigness. That's the difference. There's bigness and magnitude, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, and bigness would be like a relative thing, like bigger than or something like that.
Yes.
Secondly, matter must be incorporeal if absolute magnitude is a form. Hmm?
Right. It could also be that there's a different way. So there's like it's not magnitude as a relative term. So what is big is always bigger than something small. Small is big. So in the statesman, there's a distinction between this kind of measurement, which is just saying A is bigger than B, and another thing is like it's a big city, which means it's big for a city, which means it's big relative to some kind of measure and not just bigger than something else, right? And so it could be that. Um, and then that's interesting. Matter must be incorporeal if absolute magnitude is a form. Um, Presumably because matter is so a body is a for is matter with a form. If even size a is a form, that means that matter has no size, it has no magnitude, and therefore it certainly isn't a body, right? So it's against the idea that, for instance, that like the Stoic idea that matter is this plastic body that receives all the determinations and is shaped by Zeus. He's like, no, matter is not a body at all because it has no intrinsic size.
Oh, so since any concept of having, well, it's a form. It isn't it like a how do we call it? Isn't it like an accident of the matter or something like, or it's this like what would it?
Right, but matter as such, like prime matter, would not have uh, a size of its own, so it wouldn't be a body.
Right, but it's not a form either, right?
It's not a form either.
The
No, no,
opposite of a
it's
form.
not.
It's a
Right, yeah,
something.
yes.
It's an idea. I mean, say it's not.
Uh, right. When he says it's incorporeal, he's not saying that it's a form. Uh, like God's forbid. So,
Okay. So it would require some form, like to become like anything that has a size already has some kind of form, at least the fact that it has a size. Okay. 99. Opinion is directed on the sensible, intelligence on the intelligible, and sanus, and discursive reason taken by itself is directed on itself. Whereas in cooperation with opinion, it creates political theory, and with intelligence, dialectical theory. Consequently, when directed on itself, it creates the theory of purification, and this is the reason why Socrates mentions it so often.
this is quite entertaining. The origins of political theory. Um, so political like theory here is like contemplation. So, like it's the study of things. So, um, and so right, so in order to, study political things, it has to use opinion as well. And in order to do dialectic, it needs nous, but with itself, it creates, right, it it creates a theory of purification. All these theories, they could actually be like he only uses the word theory explicitly in the dialectical thing, right? In the Greek. So instead of supplementing theory, we could perhaps add virtue, right? And then that would connect more. That might connect more. So it would be like in cooperation with opinion, it creates or it does political virtue. In cooperation with nous, it does dialectical theory, which is contemplative virtue. Um, and and then when directed on itself, it develops purificatory virtue. So that would be perhaps the best account. So here it's interesting that it's since discursive reasoning is the thinking that we're responsible for, where we give reasons and we take reasons, then it's also what develops the virtues, right? And the different kinds of virtue. And that it will then use different um uh it it will use different powers of the soul to do that. So for instance, the political virtue, you need to know like what are the right situations in which you can get angry, right? So that you don't end up on Reddit as the asshole, for instance, right? Those and that's something where you need opinion, you just need experience, right? You need many cases and things like that. And whereas the for you to do, dialectical theory and therefore contemplative virtue, you need nous. So you're going to need some insight into the separate substances. And whereas it's interesting. So just by yourself, you can figure out what you need to be purified, right? So because it's a question. It's so purificatory virtue doesn't depend on any, insight into the truth. It doesn't depend on any perception, so no experience, presumably. It just depends on you thinking, what do I actually need, right? And like figuring out, like, what am I, and what. Right, so remember that Porphyry says that like the beginning of purificatory virtue is knowing that you are a separate soul, and then figuring out what do I actually need, what should I do from this, right? So that's interesting. But of course, like on the face of it, like I mean, the more immediate reason why he's written this is just to explain why he keeps mentioning dianoia in this passage, right? This is the reason why Socrates mentions it so often, right? Because the whole text is about purificatory virtue, and that's why he's discussing it. And maybe there
And
was someone who said
this is not about anything. That would be the like it's not
it's
somehow.
just the soul thinking about itself, right? It's not about anything outside the soul. So that finishes the discourse on detachment, right? And so so why does the philosopher detach himself from the body? Because uh, So he flees pleasures and right, let me get this here. He despises the pleasures, and the senses get in the way of true knowledge, and the forms can only be known in thought and without the body. So the the point is, and that was necessary to explain why he wants to die, right? So the philosopher detached himself from the body, and since he detached himself from the body, he longs to die. Therefore, the philosopher longs to die. So explaining that first premise, the philosopher detached himself from the body. Now there's this interlude where he talks about what the true philosophers would say, and so this is a new passage of the text, which I'll share here for us to read. Let me move this. Okay. All these things will necessarily make the true philosophers believe and say to each other something like this. So the question, like, who are these true philosophers? Right? There
Mm-hmm.
is likely to be something such as a path to guide us out of our confusion. Because as long as we have a body and our soul is fused with such an evil, we shall never adequately attain what we desire, which we affirm to be the truth. What is this path? Right? So, and he said the body is an evil here, right? That's harsh language. The body keeps us busy in 1,000 ways because of its need for nurture. Moreover, if certain diseases befall it, they impede our search for truth. It fills us with wants, desires, fears, all sorts of illusions and much nonsense, so that, as it is said, in truth and in fact, no thought of any kind ever comes to us from the body. Only the body and its desires cause war, civil discord, and battles, for all wars are due to the desire to acquire wealth. Big claim. And it is the body and the care of it to which we are enslaved, which compel us to acquire wealth. And all this makes us too busy to practice philosophy. And of course, this is opposed to, for instance, the theory of the Republic, right? Where doing war has more to do with honor and and wanting glory and things like that. It continues. Worst of all, if we do get some respite from it and turn to some investigation, everywhere in our investigations the body is present, makes for confusion and fear, so that prevents us from seeing the truth. There's like a something about the Phaedo itself here, right? Where there's this idea that the emotions of Socrates' listeners is what gets them in the way of understanding the theory of the separate soul, right? And the immortality of the soul, because they're sorry to see Socrates die. Right? It really has been shown to us that if we are ever to have pure knowledge, we must escape from the body and observe things in themselves with the soul by itself. It seems likely that we shall then, only then, when we are dead, attain that which we desire and of which we claim to be lovers, namely wisdom, as our argument shows, not while we live. For it is impossible to attain any pure knowledge with the body. Then one of the two things is true, if it is impossible. Either we can never attain knowledge, or we can do so after death. Then, and not before, the soul is by itself apart from the body. While we live, we shall be closest to knowledge if we remain as much as possible from association with the body and do not join with it more than we must. If we are not infected with its nature, but purify ourselves from it until the God himself frees us, right? He has to take the initiative, we can't kill ourselves. In this way, we shall escape the contamination of the body's folly. We shall be likely to be in the company of people of the same kind, and by our own efforts we shall know all that is pure, which is presumably the truth, for it is not permitted to the impure to attain the pure. Such are the things, Simmias, that all those who love learning in the proper manner must say to one another and believe, or do not think so. I certainly do, Socrates. So at the end, he calls the proper philosopher, the true philosophers, those who love learning in the proper manner, right? And the emphasis all here is like once we've established that the philosopher wants to detach himself from the body, well, the only true detachment is death. So he's going to have to desire death, right? And so this is the new section, which last 18 paragraphs here. And also, even the next section, as Wester Inc. has separated, purification of the way to God is also included in this passage. Um, okay, so that's what we'll be discussing in the next few classes. But we can already like start.
Okay, second. Where am I?
100.
Yeah, okay. Now, who are the interlocutors in this passage? If they are the true philosophers, how can they be subject to the emotions of the crowd? If, on the other hand, they are learners only, so are not yet true philosophers, how can they be called true philosophers? The latter view, so that they're learners, is taken by Oniter and Atticus, the former by Patorius and Plutarch. According to Proclus himself, the speakers are the true philosophers, but their words refer to men in general who are liable to emotions of this kind. But, so someone, is there any difference at all? Every word that is said is true of those who are still being purified. They still experience these emotions since their purification is not yet completed. This way of life, as has been said before, should be regarded as a preparation.
Right. So the question is like in that whole speech, there's like, oh, only once we're dead will we be free of the emotions of the body and it won't be bothering us. But they were called the true philosophers, so they should already not bother about emotions. And so Proclus' solution was that it is the true philosophers. It is spoken from, from the position of someone like Socrates, who is not affected by these emotions, or these emotions at least aren't an impediment for his knowing. But he's, as it were, speaking for everyone, and he's making a speech, right, to his to the other people there. So he's talking about everyone, right? And but um, Damascus says, well, no, it's these are true of those who are still being purified, right? So they still experience these emotions because their purification is not yet complete. So here, the true philosophers are not those who have attained; they're the ones who are still purifying themselves for Damascus. Right. And now he turns the question that was raised here that that says there is likely to be something such as a path to guide us out of our confusion. So what is this path here, which is translated here as a trail?
Okay. What is this trail? It is the corollary, so to speak, which emerges from the preceding argument. If the philosopher detaches himself from the body and thus enters into contact with truth, he can enjoy this truth completely only by complete detachment. This is the gift bestowed on us by perfect death, and in view of this, it is obvious that such a death will be welcome when it comes. The reasoning is called a trail because the philosopher, following the Pythagorean maxim, does not tread the highways or the highways.
Y-
So,
Yeah. Yeah, so the meaning of this Pythagorean maxim, like with other Pythagorean maxims, is pure. Um, but the but anyway, there's things that the word trail, atropos, is a reference to this, is like a nod to this Pythagorean idea, and Socrates' interlocutors here are Pythagoreans. Um, so and again, there is something like a bit. So he says that the reasoning is it. It could also be. It could not be that the reasoning is called a trail, but the word is trail because the trail actually doesn't seem to be the reasoning. The trail is death, right? That's the
mm,
question. I think that's the point. So there must be a way for us to separate ourselves from the body. Well, the way is death, right? I think because that's the argument. And again, perfect death, right? Perfect death translates panteles thanatos, so like total, complete death, because this is contrasting with the people who die without purifying themselves, and then they're still attached to the body, so they become like these ghosts surrounding the body, and then are reborn as animals. So perfect, like totally, total separation of the body.
mm,
Um, that is the idea here. So that would be the path that um, Socrates mentions when he says there must be something such as a path to guide us out of our confusion. Um, and it's interesting because later here in the Phaedo, we're not going to read the commentary on this section, because then it's more to do with the arguments about immortality. But later in the Phaedo, there's this passage about um, the tragedians are wrong when they say that the path to Hades is simple. Rather, it must be complex because otherwise we wouldn't need a daimon to show us the way. We read this passage when we were talking about the daimon. And again, the daimon is, the daimon shows us the way to death. And that makes it plausible that, the daimon that shows us the way to death isn't just one that picks us up at the end, but it's one that accompanies us throughout life if life is supposed to be a purification. Right. Um,
right. So the point here is just that there's this move from if any little bit of the um philosophy is detachment from the body, then complete philosophy must be complete death.
Yeah, and there's a bit of argument from the end to the means here. Something like, since we agree that we have to detach ourselves from the body, there has to be the possibility of total separation. And there has to be something that gives us this, right? Um, and that's complete death. So with that, we're getting to the end. Um, and so we'll pick up next week.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, so
Yes.
that's February 1st. So that means I'll already send you
Fine.
the
I
thing.
still didn't send you, I think. I have to check what's going on.
No, so do you want me to
Okay,
send a
well.
new one
No,
with
I'll,
the
I'll
month?
I'll take care of it. I have to check if what's going on with
Okay,
it.
then I'll send this one separately. Okay,
Yeah, send another one. I'll send both of them. Okay, thank you.
okay, okay. Bye.
Bye.